I'm 79 years old, and the Psalms are not what most people think they are. Most people treat the Psalms like a comfort food, something warm to reach for when life gets hard. A few beautiful verses, a feeling of being soothed, and then back to whatever was troubling them before. And I understand that. I did the same thing for most of my life. But after 79 years of living, real living, the kind with loss and confusion and seasons where God felt very far away, I finally understood what the Psalms actually are. They are not poetry written about peace. They are the road that leads to it. And that road goes through places most people are not willing to walk. The Psalms were written by people in genuine crisis. David was fleeing for his life. He was betrayed by his own son. He was crushed by guilt so heavy he said his bones wasted away. The other writers were watching their nation collapse, sitting in foreign captivity, wondering if God had forgotten them entirely. These were not people writing from a comfortable chair with a cup of tea. These were people on the floor. And yet, and this is the first thing most people miss, the Psalms almost never stay on the floor. They move. They travel from the darkest confession to the highest praise, often within the same poem. That movement is not accidental. That movement is the whole lesson. Psalm 23 is the most recognized psalm in the world. Everyone knows the valley of the shadow of death. Everyone knows the green pastures and still waters. But here is what people read past every single time. The shepherd doesn't lead the sheep around the valley. He leads them through it. The peace that Psalm 23 promises is not the peace of avoiding hard things. It is the peace of discovering that you are not alone inside them. Most people spend their entire lives trying to arrange their circumstances so that they never have to enter the valley. And then, when they inevitably do, because everyone does, they feel abandoned. They feel like their faith failed them. But the psalm never promised you wouldn't enter the valley. It promised that when you do, the rod and the staff are there. That's a completely different kind of peace. It's not fragile. It doesn't depend on your circumstances staying manageable. It holds even when everything is falling. And then go deeper into that same psalm. The table prepared in the presence of your enemies. Most people read that as triumphant. God showing your enemies that you're blessed, but sit with it longer. A table set in the presence of enemies means you are eating while they are still there. The enemies haven't left. The threat hasn't disappeared. The peace isn't on the other side of the resolution. It is available right now in the middle of the unresolved tension. That's the depth most people never reach, because they keep waiting for the conflict to be over before they allow themselves to be at peace. The psalm is teaching something radical. Peace is not downstream of resolution. Peace is available in the midst of it. Psalm 46 takes this even further. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Most translations smooth over what that phrase actually says in the original. The Hebrew is more like an abundantly found help in tight places, not help that arrives eventually. Help that is abundantly available precisely when you're most constricted, when the walls are closing in, when there's no room to maneuver. That is when this help is most present, not least present. Then the psalm says something that stopped me completely the first time I truly heard it. Be still and know that I am God. People quote that constantly. They put it on wall art. But the context of that verse is catastrophic. The earth is giving way. The mountains are falling into the sea. The nations are in uproar. And in the middle of that complete chaos, the instruction is, be still. Not because the chaos has stopped. Be still while the chaos is happening. The stillness is not a reaction to calm. The stillness is a choice made inside the storm. And that choice, that radical interior stillness chosen in the middle of external chaos, is what the psalm is calling the knowledge of God. To know God is to be capable of that stillness. It can't be faked. It can't be performed. It has to grow in you over years of actually practicing it. Psalm 91 is the one that most people reach for in fear, and rightly so. But the very first verse contains a condition that people almost always skip. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High dwells, not visits, not passes through, dwells. The promises of Psalm 91 are not for the person who remembers God when the diagnosis comes back bad. They are for the person who has been living inside that shelter as a regular address. This took me a long time to understand, because I wanted the promises without the dwelling. I wanted the protection without the presence. I wanted the benefits of closeness without actually being close. It doesn't work that way. The peace that Psalm 91 describes, that thing of not fearing the terror of the night or the arrow that flies by day, That peace is not switched on by reciting the psalm in a moment of panic. It is the accumulated result of a life built in a particular orientation toward God. The psalm isn't a spell, it's a description of what happens in a life that is chosen dwelling as its fundamental posture. Psalm 62 is perhaps the most structurally honest about how this peace actually develops. David uses a word twice that is often translated as only or alone. My soul finds rest in God alone. He alone is my rock and my salvation. But the Hebrew word carries a sense of deliberate exclusion, like closing a door, like saying, I am not looking for this anywhere else, not in other people's opinions of me, not in how my circumstances resolve, not in whether I am finally understood or finally vindicated, in God alone. And here's what most people miss about that kind of singular focus. It's not passive. It's one of the most active decisions a human being can make, because we are surrounded every single moment by things that offer themselves as alternatives: comfort, approval, control, certainty. The soul that has found real peace has not stumbled into it. It has learned, sometimes painfully, to keep closing the door on every substitute. And every time it closes that door, it finds that what remains is more than enough. Psalm 131 is only 3 verses long, and I overlooked it for most of my life because of its brevity. That was a mistake. David says his heart is not lifted up, his eyes are not raised too high. He does not occupy himself with things too great or too marvelous for him. And then the image, like a weaned child with its mother, not a hungry child who wants something from the mother, a weaned child, a child who is simply content to be near, not seeking, not grasping, not demanding, just present. That image describes the final destination of the soul that has been through everything, not a soul that has never suffered, a soul that has passed through enough to stop needing things to be different. That peace is not resignation. It is not giving up. It is something much harder and much more beautiful. It is the discovery that the presence itself is enough, that being held is the point, not being fixed. Psalm 139 goes to the deepest place of all. Where shall I go from your spirit? Where shall I flee from your presence? And then David lists every extreme: heaven, the depths of the earth, the farthest reaches of the sea, darkness so complete that nothing is visible, and in every single location the same reality. Even there your hand leads me, even there your right hand holds me. This is the psalm that finally dismantled my deepest fear, which was not death or suffering but abandonment. The fear that there would come a moment, some extremity of circumstance or failure or despair, where I would finally be outside the reach of that presence. Psalm 139 says that location does not exist. There is no such place. You cannot get far enough into the darkness that the darkness becomes hiding. Even the darkness is not dark to God. That means the peace available to you is not conditional on where you are, what has happened to you, what you have done, or how far you feel from everything you once believed. The reach does not end. Psalm 34 brings it all into the practical. I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from all my fears. Not some fears, not the manageable fears, all of them, but the seeking comes first. And the seeking is not a single desperate cry in a moment of crisis. The seeking is a lifestyle. The psalm was written by a man who had just escaped from an enemy by pretending to be insane, one of the lowest and most humiliating moments in David's life. And from that specific place of shame and desperation, he writes a psalm about the face of the Lord being against evildoers, about the Lord being close to the brokenhearted, about the righteous having many afflictions, but the Lord delivering them from all of them. He is not writing from triumph. He is writing from the decision to seek even when everything feels wrong. And that is the practical application that every one of these psalms is moving toward. The peace the psalms offer is not a destination you arrive at and then maintain effortlessly. It is a practice. It is the daily, sometimes hourly decision to seek, to dwell, to close the door on substitutes, to be still when chaos is loudest, to walk through the valley instead of waiting at the entrance for it to disappear, to trust that the reach extends even into your farthest, darkest place. At 79, having buried people I loved, having lived through failures I didn't think I could survive, having known seasons of doubt that I am not ashamed to admit, what I can tell you is that this kind of peace is real. It is not the peace of a life that went smoothly. It is the peace of a life that went deeply. And the Psalms, read not for comfort but for truth, will take you there. But here is what goes even deeper than the movement itself. The Psalms model something about how transformation actually works in a human being. They do not instruct you to feel differently. They do not command you to manufacture peace through willpower or positive thinking. They lament, they rage, they confess, they despair, and then they turn. And the turning is not because the circumstances changed. The turning is a choice made, while the circumstances are exactly the same as they were in the lament. That is, perhaps, the most countercultural thing about these ancient poems. Our entire age tells you that how you feel is a function of what is happening to you. The Psalms insist on something different. They insist that there is a movement available to you that is not determined by your circumstances, because the object of that movement is not circumstances. It is a presence that exists outside of and above all circumstances. And the person who learns to move toward that presence, to practice that turn, regardless of what is happening around them, is the person who eventually discovers what the Psalms have been promising all along. What makes these 7 Psalms particularly powerful together is that each one addresses a different obstacle that stands between a person and that peace. Psalm 23 addresses the obstacle of the valley, the fear of what you will have to go through. Psalm 46 addresses the obstacle of catastrophe, the fear that things could get so bad that even God cannot hold them. Psalm 91 addresses the obstacle of exposure, the fear of being unprotected in a dangerous world. Psalm 62 addresses the obstacle of distraction, the constant pull towards substitutes that promise what only one source can deliver. Psalm 131 addresses the obstacle of pride, the part of us that cannot rest because it is still striving to understand and control and achieve. Psalm 139 addresses the obstacle of distance, the fear of being beyond reach. And Psalm 34 addresses the obstacle of despair in the midst of humiliation, the question of whether seeking is still worth anything when everything has gone wrong. Together, they form a complete picture, not a theology course, not a set of propositions to memorize, a map of the interior life, drawn by people who walked every part of that territory and came out the other side with something worth passing on.